in that we have one of our own residents, Elaine Keener, presenting in character the story of Angelina Grimke, who besides her sister, was the only known white Southern woman to be part of the abolitionists. At the end of the performance, for those of you who care to stay, we will have a question and answer period during which you may ask Elaine about her character and the abolition movement. What we'll do is I'll come out back on stage, and we have Eileen Duggan and Olga Ivanova with microphones in the audience if you have any questions, and we will. Since she's in costume, I will take the questions and relay them to her. She's wearing a bonnet, so that's covering her ears, so it'll be sort of difficult to hear. To help set the scene for our character, we will take you back to the time of slavery, and Ashby Pond resident Wes Kriebel will sing "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," accompanied on piano by Rose Kriebel.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. Sweet low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming down to see, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. If you get there before I do, coming for to carry me home. I'm gone to there to tell my friends I'm coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. So sometimes up and sometimes down, coming for to carry me home. But still my soul feels heavenly bound, coming for to carry me home. Coming for to carry me home. And now, let's meet Angelina Grimke.
Good afternoon. I'm Angelina Emily Grimke Well. Thank you for inviting me to be with you this afternoon on this sunny but cold February day in 1875. Although I'm 70 years old, I speak out against slavery and for women's rights whenever I get the chance. What has prompted me to have such endeavors, you may ask? Well, I'll start at the beginning. I was born February 20th, 1805, in Charleston, South Carolina. I was the 14th and last child born to John and Mary Grimke. Yes, my mother had 14 children, but 3 died in infancy. I was not the well-behaved, proper, subdued little Southern girl my mother wanted. I was outspoken, inquisitive, and my family called me the rebel. Daddy had a plantation, Belmont, outside of Charleston and a house in Charleston on East Bay Street, and he was a lawyer and judge in Charleston. He had an extensive library, and I read every book I could get my hands on. It was reading the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States that I learned all men are created equal with inalienable rights. This concept became the foundation of my thinking and actions for the rest of my life. Daddy had lots of slaves working on the plantation, and Mother had slaves to help her with that brood of children. I could see their need for help, but it seemed wrong to me to deny people their freedoms. I remember when I was 10, Mother and I were in the parlor sewing. A couple of slaves were nearby polishing furniture, and it started to rain. And Mama called to them to lower the windows and to get Jeremiah to come in and help. Now, Jeremiah was outside working in the garden. It was hot. He had no shirt on. So when he went to pull down those big, heavy windows, I could see all these cuts and welts across his back. And when he went to the next room to lower the windows, I said to Mama, "Mama, what happened to Jeremiah's back?" He misbehaved and had to be punished by the slave master. "What on earth did he do?" "That's no concern of yours." But Mama, if I misbehave, will I be whipped like that?" "Of course not. Quit being so inquisitive and get back to your sewing." I never forgot how his back looked. And when I close my eyes now, I can still see it. Knowing how I felt about slavery, I was taken aback when on my 12th birthday, I was given my own personal slave. I said, "Mama, I don't want a slave. I don't need a slave. I just wanted some new books." "Why do you fight this? I don't know where you get your ideas. You don't act like a proper Southern girl. This is our way of life. Make your peace with it." My parents and older brothers and sisters laughed at my strange ideas that they thought I had. I said, "It's against our Christian faith. It's against the Constitution to have slaves. And besides, a person cannot own a person. You own a table. You own a chair, but you don't own a human being." And they explained to me that by law, Negroes were only 3/5 human. And they backed up slavery with scripture in the Bible. But my sister Sarah agreed with me. She thought slavery was wrong too. She was intelligent, she was compassionate, and we formed a strong bond of friendship as well as sisterhood that has lasted our whole lives. When I discovered that the Episcopal church my family attended supported slavery, I refused to go, but my parents physically forced me to. But when I turned 13, I knew I had to follow my heart. I knew I had to follow what I thought was right, and I refused to be confirmed in the church. Everybody was upset. Everybody tried to change my mind. And the minister came to the house and said, "Angelina, you are risking your salvation by turning your back on the church and its teachings." Pardon me, Reverend Sir, but even the threat of hell will not move me. Oh boy, everybody was horrified. Mother was doubly upset because I had said the word hell. Somehow, I survived my teenage years in Charleston. My parents made sure I attended all the proper social elite functions and at least gave the appearance of living the traditional upper-class Southern values. But they never stopped trying to change my way of thinking. I mean, really, as if my thinking were inferior just because I was a girl. Men don't necessarily have superior judgments, do they? I continued to be kind to the slaves and I taught some of them to read. When Daddy found out, he called me into the library. "Angelina, you have defied your mother, me, and the laws of our state. I am tired of your disobedience. You do not know your place. A slave that can read is a threat." "But Daddy, how can it be wrong to teach a slave to read and be his best person?" "Are you so impudent as to challenge me now? I will protect our way of life. You are no longer allowed in my library or to read my books." As you can imagine, that was the worst punishment I could have been given. And the slaves that I had taught to read were also whipped. I continued to lead the Sunday services for the slaves and did as good a job as any minister I'd ever heard. And then Reverend McDowell came to town from the north to lead the Presbyterian church, and he believed slavery was wrong. I was 21 and could do what I wanted, well, almost. So I joined his church, and we had many satisfying conversations. I became real hopeful that there would be change. But after 3 years, I got tired of his pray and wait, pray and wait. I wanted to pray and act, so I stood up in front of the congregation and I said, "It is time we condemn the practice of owning slaves. It is not enough to treat them with kindness. We must free all of them now." Well, that didn't go over too well, and I got expelled from the church by the elders. But Sarah and I found a like-minded faith community in the Quakers, and we started attending the Quaker meeting house. But after a while, it really dawned on us that the South was not where we belonged. And when I was 24, we moved to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And there we attended the Arch Street Quaker meeting house where Lucretia Mott was one of the ministers. And we lived with our widowed sister, Anna. Living with Anna, we saw how hard it was for a widow to survive in the 1830s. I mean, her best chance of survival was to remarry. Sarah and I took teaching positions to help pay the rent and earn a living. Well, after a while, my sisters introduced me to Edward Battle, and we fell in love, and we were talking about getting married. And one day he said to me, "Angelina, my darling, I am so proud of your efforts on behalf of freeing the slaves. But I worry that it places me second in the order of your affections. Well, at least when we marry and have children, you won't have time to continue your quest to free the slaves." We didn't have to deal with that issue because in 1832, when I was 27, he died from the cholera epidemic. After his death, I just went full steam into my anti-slavery efforts. Sarah and I joined the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society, and we particularly liked William Lloyd Garrison's abolitionist efforts and his publication, The Liberator. When an anti-slavery meeting in Boston, Massachusetts, way up there in Boston, Massachusetts, an anti-slavery meeting, broken into by a mob, the abolitionists tied up with ropes and dragged through the streets of Boston. I was so upset, I wrote Mr. Garrison a personal letter. But he published it on the front page of his next edition of The Liberator. I have parts of it here. Let me read it to you. "Dear respected friend, I felt compelled to offer you my sympathy at this alarming crisis. I was not prepared to hear about such opposition to the abolitionist. I feared our principles would be compromised or even surrendered. I'm so glad that you stand firm in your principles and say that you will suffer and die rather than yield 1 inch. It gives me courage to act and never give up, or the hope of the slave will be extinguished and their chains strengthened 100 times. May we all be willing to endure until the end, as we call upon the slave owners to suffer the loss of what they call property. Let us be willing to suffer the loss of our property and even life itself in what we believe to be the cause bleeding humanity. I believe emancipation is a cause worth dying for. I say so from what I have seen, heard, and known in the land of slavery. Although I desire to be spared the anguish of seeing our beloved country to come to violence, to spare the lives of slaves and give them their freedom, I fear blood may be spilled in a civil war someday, and this will be one of our greatest griefs. I said this 26 years before the Civil War. Well, after my publication in his newspaper, I became pretty well known among the abolitionists. Another abolitionist I loved and respected was Elijah Lovejoy, and he also had a publication. And Elijah said, "If it is morally wrong, it cannot be politically right. If it is morally wrong, it cannot be politically right." That is true even to this very day. Elijah Lovejoy was murdered for his anti-slavery efforts, and his murderers were never brought to justice. But the high point of my efforts was considered an essay I wrote entitled "An Appeal to the Christian Women of the South." It was the only such appeal written by a Southern woman to Southern women, and because I had had the benefit of slaves, it was an impressive argument to say slavery was wrong. I said it's against our Christian faith to treat people this way. It's against the Constitution, and a lot of women agreed with me. And I said, get up petitions. Get your lady friends to sign the petitions. Take it to your church leaders and your legislators and say, we have opinions and we have ideas and we want to express them. My appeal was reprinted in many publications and publicly burned in South Carolina, where I was never allowed to return home. And had I done so, I would have been imprisoned. But the American Anti-Slavery Society held me in high esteem. Both Sarah and I were invited to New York City in 1836 to be the first female attendees at one of their conferences and to train to become agents for them. Our trainer was Theodore Dwight Weld. After our training, Sarah and I went all over Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, giving anti-slavery presentations. And we met with lots of opposition. First, I was a woman speaking in public, which was not done in the 1830s. Secondly, I spoke to a mixed audience, both men and women, which was definitely not done in the 1830s. We had a lot of agitation coming our way. And I remember in Philadelphia, we were going in to give an anti-slavery presentation, and rocks were thrown at us as we went into the building. And when I was standing at the lectern speaking, I could hear rocks hitting on the window, and one came through, hit me in the side of the face, and I kept on talking. All the while we were going around giving our lectures, Theodore Weld and I were exchanging letters. We saw eye to eye on everything and liked each other immensely. So when he asked me to marry him, I was very delighted, and I wrote to my mother for her blessing. My daddy had died when I was 14, and it was customary to get a parental blessing. So I wrote to Mama to get her blessing, and she wrote back immediately. And here is her letter. Dear Angelina, I'm sure my dear daughter will marry no one who is not equal to her in every sense of the word. From the description given of Mr. Well by both you and Sarah, he sounds suitable in all respects. You will now have a protector, and whatever you do in the future will have to be sanctioned by him. I shall now be relieved from this anxiety, for if he approves, I have no right to interfere. I've always believed you acted from conscientious motives, even though they differed from mine. After you become a matron, I hope you will retire from your busy publicity scenes and enjoy the happiness that being a homemaker will bring. Also, you didn't mention anything about Mr. Wells' appearance. Is he good looking? I would like to know everything concerning him. Meanwhile, I do indeed grant you my blessings. Despite our difference of opinions, my love for you has never diminished. Your affectionate mother and sincere friend, Mary Grimke. At last, I was doing something my mother approved of. I was getting married. Theodore Weld and I married on May 14, 1838, in Philadelphia, in my sister's Anna's home. About 40 people attended. Both Negroes and whites were in the guest list at our wedding. And needless to say, our wedding became the source of much gossip in Philadelphia that season. Mother did not come to the wedding as she was ill, and she died the next year, having never met Theodore. She had said to me, Angelina, I cannot free my slaves now. I need them to survive. I will free them when I die, upon my death. And she did. She kept her promise and freed the slaves. Theodore and I moved to New Jersey to a farm. We had a garden, a vegetable garden. We had an orchard. And the farming provided our needs, our food, but we needed a little additional, so we started a boarding school. And we took in girls and boys, many of them children of the abolitionists. I taught history, Sarah taught French, Theodore taught mathematics, science, and drawing. And the children had chores to do on the farm. We also lived near the woods where they went in and gathered snakes and frogs for science. It was a very broad, complete education. And after we left there, we went to the Raritan Bay Union School and taught there. And it was struggling financially. And Theodore and I took over the finances, brought the school back into solvency, renamed it Eagleswood, and it became a huge success. It was quite an exciting liberal education. We had a choir, we had dances at the school, we taught morality. It was very, very unique in those days, especially with girls and boys coming. Now, Theodore had started a school years before he got into his anti-slavery efforts in Cincinnati, the Oneida School. And we would call that today a vocational school. He realized that a lot of children were not academically inclined, and so he started this school where you could study blacksmithing, carpentry, farming, stonemasonry. It was a school to teach laborers their skill. He was very, very creative, as we were in our schools there in New Jersey. Excuse me. Well, all these years we were teaching, Theodore was going to Washington to do anti-slavery efforts. Now, John Quincy Adams asked him to come to D.C. to help stop the gag rule. Southern senators had established a gag rule where no anti-slavery issues could be mentioned, brought to the floor. And he wanted Theodore's help. So Theodore was gone a lot. That left Sarah and me to teach all the classes, do all the discipline, the administrative work, and of course I cooked for everybody. I cleaned for everybody. I did the laundry. We were busy women and tired. While we were doing our educational programs in New Jersey, we had 3 children. Our first was a son, Charles. And Charles went to Harvard, graduated, and became a writer. Our second child was also a son, and it was Theodore. And Theodore was sickly, and we didn't know what was wrong with him. And we took him to doctor after doctor. We took him to spiritualists. We took him to alternative medical people. We took him to anybody that would see us, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with him. He got weaker and weaker. He couldn't walk. He couldn't stand. Couldn't feed himself. He was wheelchair bound. And we finally put him in a hospital for the care that he needed. And this broke my heart. Our third child was a little girl, and we named her Sarah Grimke Weld, after my beloved sister. Well, when the Civil War was over, we moved to Hyde Park, Massachusetts, where we live now. And 5 years ago, in 1870, I and 42 women marched into town to cast our ballots in a symbolic voting box because we wanted to vote. And we wanted them to know we wanted to vote. Some of my anti-slavery talks, I mentioned this. I compared the enslavement of white women to the Negro. Both were considered intellectually inferior. Both were denied a liberal education. The Negro was enslaved physically and couldn't leave. The white woman was enslaved by family expectations and the cultural rules. She was supposed to get married, have babies, and be the perfect hostess. And that was it. Well, when my sister Sarah said that when she was a young girl, I want to be a lawyer. Oh, how funny, you're a girl, you want to be a lawyer. Everybody laughed at her. But when Sarah was taking care of Daddy when he was dying, he told her she would have been the very best lawyer. And he had some sons who were lawyers. So this was a confirmation of her intelligence, and she certainly was smart. I was fortunate to marry a man who encouraged me to do what I thought was right. In fact, it was with his help that I became the first woman to speak before a United States legislative body. I spoke before the Massachusetts State Legislature, asking them to abolish slavery and to refuse to buy slave-made products, which only benefit the owners. I really believed it was the right and duty of women to join with men to fight slavery and any other social injustice. I met with lots of opposition, both in education, in women's rights, and in anti-slavery efforts. And the more opposition I got, the harder I fought. I hope you too believe in the rights of each person to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Regardless of race, creed, color, age, sex, religion, I hope you too will look to your heart to decide what is right and then do it, regardless of what others are doing, regardless of the criticisms they level at you. Thank you for listening to me. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
If anyone has to leave, you may do so. You're entitled. But we'd like you to stay if you can, and we will have a Q&A. As I mentioned, Elaine is in costume and therefore covering her ears, so she might not hear every question that is rendered. So I will repeat any questions that you might ask her. First the lady here, and then gentlemen.
What did her brothers think of all her anti-slavery activity?
I had a brother, Thomas, who was a supporter of the American Colonization Society. That was a group of people who wanted to gather all of the Negroes and send them back to Africa. and he and I fought all the time. I wanted the slaves to be freed immediately. I wanted them to have good citizenship, be fully American, and he wanted to ship them home. I had another brother, Henry. He was married, had 3 children. His wife died. And then he teamed up with a slave, Nancy Weston, and they had a son. And then he married her, and they had 2 more sons. He had another son, and then after he died, their 3rd child was born 2 months after he died. Now, it was okay in those days for a white man to have sexual relations with his slaves. But you don't like them, you just use them. And Henry loved her. He loved Nancy, and he married her. And that was a definite no-no. And so they had to go out west, which is, interestingly enough, that was Ohio, which was out west. And they had the 3 boys. Now, when Henry died, the 3 sons were left. Nancy was the negress, and Sarah and I wanted to educate those 3 boys. And John went to Florida. The youngest went to Florida and spent his life there. But the other 2 were interested in advancement, and we felt we should help these biracial children. So Sarah and I raised the money, and we sent Archie to Harvard, and he became a lawyer. And Archie married Sarah Stanley, a white woman. And after a while, the stress and strain of being married to a black man got her, and she left him. She was gone a long time, and then she finally divorced him, and then she committed suicide by poisoning herself. They had a little girl, Angelina, named for me. And then Frank, we sent to Princeton, and he became a minister. And he married Charlotte Fortin, a black woman and a very active abolitionist family also. And they moved to Washington, D.C., and started a ministry there, he and Charlotte. She was 13 years his senior. Everybody thought this marriage isn't going to work, but it did. And he and his wife were very effective ministers in Washington, D.C. My other brothers fought in the Civil War. One was killed. All my sisters, except for Sarah, my beloved Sarah, followed mother's role and got married and had babies and played that role. So my siblings had a tough time with Sarah and my reputation.
The gentleman on the house.
Oh, thanks. I was wondering what became of the freed slaves when your mother passed away. Do you know specifically, and more in a general sense, were they likely to go north? Or I would think that their prospects would still be daunting, even though they were free.
I would think so too, and I don't really know. We do know that Nancy Weston, who was one of our slaves and had married my brother, and then we took care of her sons, and she stayed in Ohio. I'm not sure what happened to the rest of them, because South Carolina was a disaster. It had pretty much been burned down, and many, many deaths, and there wasn't much left. So I'm not sure what happened to all of them. Yes?
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Angelina, you seem like you are inhabiting her. How did you get so interested in Angelina Grimke and doing this?
Well, I have a friend who's a librarian, and she came upon this book, Women's Letters. And in it were letters from Angelina, and letters that she had written to Theodore, which are priceless. You can imagine a love letter in the 1830s. It was just wonderful. And is it a sin that I love you because I'm supposed to love God, and yet God doesn't seem to be enough for me? Angelina actually said that. Anyhow, her letters are in here, and my friend, the librarian, that's Sylvia Grandel I'm talking about, Linda. said, I need to do her because at least your accent will work. So, and so a friend of mine wrote up the script, and I was happy to get to know this brave, courageous woman. She was something else.
The gentleman over here.
I guess I'm still surprised that obviously a family of great wealth, why you weren't just put away and shut up somewhere. Really, back then, saying those kind of things, I would think would be dangerous no matter how rich and prominent your family is.
Yeah, a lot of people called me Devilina. It's interesting. Some people thought I was great and a great heroine, and some people hated me, muchly. And a lot of abolitionists were killed, as you know. So it was a tricky time.
Lady down front here.
What happened to your children?
Charles went to Harvard. He refused to fight in the Civil War on moral reasons. At that time, you could pay somebody to take your place instead of being drafted. And my husband, Theodore, offered to do that. But Charles said, no, I'd rather go to jail. I want to take a stand. I will not fight. And so he stayed at Harvard and finished at Harvard and became a writer. And Theodore was too sickly to fight in the Civil War. He was very, very limited physically. And Sarah was in school at the time the Civil War broke out. That's all I can tell you about my kids. That's all.
Anyone else? Art.
I'd like to bring you back to the here and now in the 21st century for a moment and ask, is this the only role that you've done? You're so adept and calm and collected and no uhing and uncertainty about what you're going to say. So what's your background? Have you done this before?
No. I was a social worker and an art therapist. When I was in high school, I wanted to be in a play. But Mom and Dad said, take physics, take calculus, Latin, blah, 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 blah. Don't be an actress. That's stuff. That's not important. Went to college. I wanted to be in the drama club, the theatrical group. But, of course, I couldn't do that because that's not worthy. So all my life, I wanted to be in a play, and I was never in a play. And then I moved to Reston and joined a church. And one time, they asked me to do a children's sermon. And I did the children's sermon with a few props. And a gentleman in the audience who was a playwright saw it and wrote a play. And so for our church fall retreat, I was in a play. My very first play, that was maybe 8 years ago, the first time I'd ever been in a play. And so I guess my acting career began at the fall retreat in my church. And every year I've been in whatever play they had. And this year, the play that they had was Angelina. And some people from Ashby Ponds were there and said, you need to do that at Ashby Ponds. And so this is the first time I've ever had a microphone or a spotlight. And this is be on a stage, this is the first time ever.
I think I can say on behalf of my fellow members of the Drama Club, we will allow her to fulfill her lifelong dream for the next 10 years here at Ashby Ponds.
Thank you.
At least 10 years, maybe 20. Anyone else? With that, let me thank you for coming and participating, and thank, once again, Elaine for this wonderful performance.
Thank you.